learn from people who've been there, done it. So let's give Alan a great big hand.
Thank you. Thank you. Quick question before we get started. Who here has a startup actively working on one? Okay. And I assume the rest of you are here because you're interested, you want to build a startup one day, be a part of it. Okay. So this is a subject that I'm very, very passionate about. My entire career has been building startups. I started my first company 2 years after I graduated from CMU, so I was way young. I know way less than you guys do already because this didn't exist. The web didn't exist, so couldn't look up anything, couldn't search for anything. So I made a lot of mistakes. Every mistake in the book, me and my co-founders, my first company, we made it all. So I tried to, give back a little bit to help. Hopefully the talk is interesting, not boring, and hopefully you'll take away one of few nuggets of information that helps you along with your journey. I probably have about 2 hours worth of information. I'm not going to bore you with all of it. I'm going to just plow right through, be as quick as possible. I'll probably try to aim for about half an hour, say 15 minutes, so you guys can ask questions. But during the talk, if you really have a question, feel free to raise your hand and ask me anything. Love to have an interactive conversation. As Dave said, I'm an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. I was an ECE grad long time ago. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur because they're cool. They have cool toys. They get to hang out with celebrities. And you just need one idea, one great idea. That's sort of the biggest hurdle. When you hear about entrepreneurs, you want to be one, you need an idea. As the talk kind of set up, the description on it says, I see a lot of entrepreneurs who believe that ideas are hard to come by. And they're only going to get one idea, one chance. And I can't tell you how far from the truth that is. There are just a ton of ideas, and there's ways to think about your entrepreneurship and how do you generate ideas and to be innovators. This book happened to be by a team of writers. Clayton Christensen is one of my favorite authors. He wrote the book, Innovator's Dilemma. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it because the innovator's dilemma, the dilemma part, is from the point of view of large companies. The large companies you want to disrupt. It's their dilemma. It's your opportunity. So the book kind of talks about why startups can succeed when you have seemingly zero chance of succeeding, yet we do every day. So these guys went on to do this book. They spent 8 years interviewing entrepreneurs, successful companies, successful CEOs. How did you think? How did you come up with this idea? How did you do whatever you were doing? Well, they said the top line conclusion is entrepreneurs think differently. I could have told them that without 8 years. Joke aside, they went very deep and they came up with this framework. It's about asking the right question, observing everyday activities around you, networking, talking to people, experimenting, prototyping. The problem that I have with this is absolutely correct. I'm not going to say Clayton Christensen and his team, his co-authors are wrong. It's just very hard for first-time entrepreneurs to use what they have described because what questions do you ask, right? You're sitting there in your room, like, where's the big problem? And that's really hard to do. Most of the interviews are backward-looking. So this is a quote by Steve. If you read that, you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. What he's saying is, well, the dots that you're connecting to get to your startup idea, to get to that piece of innovation, you cannot do it forward, meaning you can't sit here and come up with your idea. You can only do it backwards, meaning you have to trust, with luck, the dots will somehow connect. This is the classic Steve story of him taking calligraphy classes at Reed, and 10 plus years later, when they were doing the Macintosh, that calligraphy class inspired him to create the font system. That's not a good way for you, and in modern days, to come up with innovation by chance. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here. You'll be taking calligraphy classes, printing classes, underwater basket weaving classes. Maybe that would be the gem of the idea 20 years from now or 10 years from now. He is an accidental entrepreneur. He never set out to be an entrepreneur. He just happened to be friends with a really smart guy named Steve Wozniak, who's very good at making computers. So how do you come up with ideas? So I have, as Dave said, started 4 companies. So I'm a testament that you can have ideas, more than one in your career. And I've seen through my investments different ways entrepreneurs come up with the ideas, their founding story. The 200 plus companies that went through the ERA cohorts. And this is my methodology or my cut at it. It's not systematic, it's not academic, it's just a bunch of strategies, a bunch of methods. The first one is the most obvious one, a personal need. What irks you? What bothers you? You know, this thing that you've done a million times, you're gonna write a script to automate some of that, and then the script breaks in certain circumstances, you make it into a program, there's your idea. Most first-time entrepreneurs focus on this because they don't have the other framework, the other awareness. Part and parcel to that is necessity, AKA the pivot. When your back is against the wall, you're running out of money if you are in a startup, ideas come because you need to survive. But that's also not good to be in. That place is not a great place. Been there, awful, don't go there. We'll talk a little bit about the pivot. It's glamorized a little bit too much in the popular press. So a little bit more methodical for the MBA students. You have done case studies. You're looking at how successful companies work. This is the Uber for X and Airbnb for Y. You know, it is simple. It's not glamorous in many ways, but it does work. One of the early companies that was in ERA was called Parking Panda. They founded in 2011, just 2.5 years after Airbnb founded, looking for parking spaces, individual parking spaces near sports stadiums, driveways that you have near a sports stadium. They went on to pivot a little bit because it turns out it doesn't have the same economy of scale that Airbnb does, but they end up working with professional commercial parking space company. Busy holiday times, you want to go downtown to shop. You don't know if there's parking. You could reserve a parking spot. That's really cool. So they were acquired and exited. Improving on a successful model. This is probably where I get most of my ideas these days, is looking at successful models and finding different niches, different ways to apply the model and improve upon it. So I'll get into a bunch of examples about this. You read the news, interesting and surprising facts. A lot of times you can read the figure or the headline and then go on and maybe tell a friend, it's like, isn't this weird? Isn't this cool? Post it on Twitter. But if you sometimes tease it apart, you can get to ideas for your next startup. This is a classic, selling pickaxe to a gold rush miner. Who remembers any of the California gold rush miners by name? Nobody. And Levi Strauss is a pickaxe salesman. They sold jeans to every one of those pickaxe, to those miners. And so here's another way. Stripe, e-commerce, big. How do you take money? Well, Stripe's, I'm not an e-commerce company, but I help you take payments. Awesome. Twilio, how do you communicate? Oh, I paid Twilio thousands of dollars a month in my last company because, yeah, my team can write the SMS interface, but why bother? It's a lot easier to use their pickaxe. Somebody gave it to you. Surprise, if you talk to enough people, they will give you ideas. Jamie just did. He gave everybody here in this room an idea. And finally, this is what unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs sit there with their notepads blankly staring at them back. They're hoping for an inspiration, the light bulb moment. It doesn't work. So most entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs, focus on personal pain, and they hope for the light bulb moment. All the stuff in the middle, you can actually apply and use to come up with your idea. One CMU-specific comment, it doesn't have to be AI or automation or robotics. That's the strength of the school. And if you have one, great, but it doesn't have to be about that. There are many, many ideas. And part and parcel to that is a serial entrepreneur, you can build on smaller ideas, have a smaller exit, learn all the skills that you need to fundraise, to grow a company, hire people, exit, will apply when you have a bigger idea. If you're trying to do a big idea at the same time doing all of that, it could be challenging. So moving right along, let's say you have an idea. I love this slide. I use this even into my internal team slides. You have an idea because this is CMU. You're mostly technical. Even the MBA folks here are technical in background. You think you build a great product, magically profit will happen. Build it and they'll come. That's not true. Don't do that. I learned the hard way. I'm an engineer, I'm a product person. I will tell you my story in 1 second, and it's a hard way to learn. So don't do that. If you take Dave's class or any of the classes here at TEPA or entrepreneurship class, these are the standard ways you'll evaluate your idea. Market size, business model, barrier of entry, what's your IP, your go-to-market plan, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go into any of this because each one of these topics is an hour talk on its own. But know that you might not have all the answers, but as an engineer or a technical person, you should learn some of this so that you can apply it and have a notion of how all of that applies to your idea. Yeah?
What is CAC and LTV stand for?
Oh, CAC is CAC versus LTV. It's a shorthand that we use a lot. Customer acquisition cost versus lifetime value. You want the lifetime value of the customer higher than the cost to acquire that customer. Usually we're looking for 3 to 4x. So if you don't do that, you will have a failure. Sorry to pick on Steve again. This is the most successful failure that I know of. It is absolutely awful. I formed my first company solely on software for this platform. We built the Office suite for Next. In 7 years, we built 14 products, from spreadsheets to word processors and so forth. 12 years, Steve couldn't sell his way out of paper bag. he sold 50,000 Next computers total. The reason this is really successful, it is the most successful platform, is because of Apple. Next was acquired by Apple in '97 because Apple couldn't figure out how to write a modern OS. They had 9 revisions, 9 generations of Mac OS up to OS 9. None of it was multitasking, so they needed Next to have a true multitasking operating system. And now the foundation that he started laying here started in '85 with CMU technology. The kernel, the Unix kernel, was Mach, is Mach. He came to campus here, and I heard him talk about '86 or '87 to recruit Avi Tavinian, who was a PhD in CS department. Now it powers billions of devices. If you go write any iOS app, NS object. Have you ever wondered what NS stands for? It's the root object. It stands for next step. This is not your only idea. I mentioned this already. You can have many. I'm not the smartest student. I was not the hardest working student. I came up with a bunch of ideas. You can too. If you believe that ideas are hard and you only have one, then you end up doing a bunch of irrational things that's going to hurt your chances. And those starts with not being able to be objective. You're holding on to your idea too tight. You're not taking feedback. You're being selective. You're only hearing the positive feedback and ignoring the negative one. Here's a really good indication that a founder is too close to their idea, not willing to explore it. Asking for an NDA still happens. It's absolutely true. And an entrepreneur would come to me looking for angel investment and said, "Can you sign this NDA?" I'll never sign an NDA because I have no upside. I could only lose, and you'll never get the feedback. You'll never be able to improve your idea. How do you recruit anybody? By asking for an NDA. Don't put your vision on a pedestal. I'll tell you a really quick story here. Airbnb. Everybody knows Airbnb. Airbnb's original vision is the host being there in the same house with you, cooking you breakfast. Who wants that? Not me. The vision was, the founder, Brian Chesky, feels that it's too impersonal. You go to one Marriott, and they go to the next city, another Marriott, they look the same. You don't get a flavor of the city. He wanted you to connect with a local person to get a flavor of what it's like to live in that city, talk to a local person. That vision, he would have been dead. The vision was changed because one of the hosts, who happened to be a drummer for a well-known band, wanted to go on tour. He didn't want to be there to cook the breakfast. He said, "But I really like the revenue. Would you be okay with that?" They said no, but Jessica Livingston, who's one of the co-founder of Y Combinator, convinced him to give it a try, and then the rest is history, as they say. Look at it, test it. Is it a painkiller or a vitamin? Lots of blogs about this. As I said, all of the previous business model, market size, you don't have to have all the answer. You just need to think about it and have a framework of how you might answer it. Too small market, technology solution looking for a problem, all of those things. If you are objective, think about it with those lenses on before you invest a ton of time, ton of effort into building something that might be too small. Lastly, I'll mention this. In today's world, technology impacting society in a way, just because you can build it, should you build it? The inventor of K-cups came out recently and said he regrets inventing it. because we have billions and billions of these plastic little cups that's floating in our oceans, all for a convenient cup of coffee. Craigslist, Craig Newmark, arguably impacted news and the world of journalism in a significant way. Would it have happened without Craig? Probably, right? The internet is happening, information is happening, but he certainly accelerated it in a meaningful way. So your first idea doesn't have to be a unicorn. There are many opportunities. Learn along the way. It's great if your first idea becomes a unicorn. Awesome. But the odds are against you. You don't have to focus on that. Just focusing on learning and building your company. 4 singles might be better than a home run. I'm a little bit biased. I think my 4 exits that you haven't heard of, to me, made my life better, right? If my first company was a unicorn, I was a technical co-founder, I might have ended up with a CTO title or SVP of engineering. I probably would have been recruited to go start another company as a technical co-founder or start a company with that in mind. I probably would never have gone on to learn all the things that I learned from the business perspective, from growing the team, from the legal perspective. All of that made me, I think, a better person. So maybe 4 singles is better than 1 home run. Okay, all those examples. I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to run really, really quickly through them. So this is my first company. It started with a personal pain point. 4 of my co-founders were electrical engineers. 1 poor business person. He was a math and econ major. We all took classes that used really bad EE-CAD tool for our circuits class. And it's like, we can do better. So we started a company to write this. Meanwhile, Jonathan went on to do some market research and came back about three months later and said, this is a really bad idea. You're not going to win. And he's probably right. So we took this and we made some lemonade out of it. We didn't want to throw away the code. We invented flowcharting software. Believe it or not, flowcharting, Visio did not exist. OmniGraffle did not exist. Visio was a customer of ours. And that was my first $1 billion mistake, literally $1 billion. Because Visio went on to be acquired by Microsoft for $1 billion. My lone business partner said, we should really port this really cool product to PCs. And the 4 engineers said, what? I'm not going to do that. I'm writing Objective-C code on Nextstep platform, which is awesome. I'm not going to write Microsoft code and write a DLL. So we gave up the PC market, not evaluating properly market size and so forth. The other thing that we invented was object to relational database. We gave away that idea to some friends of ours, and they built a company called Persistent Software that went public in the mid-90s. But here's Steve with Diagram. That was my first commercial product. We didn't do any vetting, had to pivot, made every mistake. Fortunately, we didn't hold on to it too tightly. We were able to switch, and we spun out some good ideas and had an exit. My next company, as I said, my first company was acquired by Sun in '96. It was the very early days of Java. So I worked for 3 years at JavaSoft. Unlike today, Java wasn't a language for the back-end servers. Sun really wanted to make Java the front-end development language, what you would do in JavaScript today. And we're banging our heads against the wall. It really was an awful experience. The JRE was out of date all the time. You have to download and update. The applets were just, bad. So I had this personal moment. It's like, this is painful. So again, it's a personal pain, but a pain that led me to JavaScript. We built some of the very earliest foundational technology using XML, backpipe, wrote the first JavaScript compiler, did some very cool things. Deep tech, networking, talked to a lot of people. So that company was acquired before we launched our beta, because I went and I talked to all of my business contacts and hit upon the CTO of AOL, who I met and knew sort of from my Sun days. Here's a fact. Anybody knew this beforehand? 80% of all US companies with more than 500 employees are self-insured. Pretty surprising, right? I would think that all companies would be with United Health or Aetna or Blue Cross. What would you do with this fact? All of these companies are self-insured, which is really good for them for saving money, healthier employees. What's bad is you're now running a mini insurance company. You have to do claims, you have to do deductibles, you have to do all the paperwork. You have to pay the doctors. So it turns out there's a bunch of legacy companies called TPAs, third-party administrators, still using fax and paper to administer all of this. A company I'm working with called Flume is disrupting them by digitizing all of that. Here's another interesting fact. I don't know this one directly, but I found it to be really interesting. The best YouTube content costs $3,000 a minute to make, like the really glossy, high production quality stuff. TV shows, whether it's on Netflix or national TV, cable TV, costs $100,000 or more. HBO, a lot more than that. There's a 33x gap in between. These couple of young entrepreneurs decide to start a company with that idea. They raised $1 billion on the seed round, a little bit bigger than you and I could raise. But what would you do? They have one take on that knowledge, that piece of knowledge. What would you do with what they have identified as an opportunity? SoulCycle. Anybody have ridden SoulCycle before? Heard of SoulCycle? Incredibly popular from the 10 years ago on to they filed for IPO in 2015. They were the darling of Wall Street. Everybody loved them. Competitors start spinning up all over the place. And shockingly, they couldn't go IPO. They withdrew the IPO last year. Why? It's back to that business analysis stuff. They had a scale problem because they don't scale the way typical technology companies scale. It's linear. It's real estate and their instructors. Both of them, the cost goes up as they became more successful because of all the other competitors. They actually had to pay more instead of less for the instructors because everybody else is fighting for them. There's one competitor on that list that succeeded. This is my friend Dennis. He was a SoulCycle instructor, one of the top ones in New York, got recruited by one of the competitors to build their training so that they can train more instructors because there was such a shortage of it. None of them did well, so eventually Peloton recruited him. Now he's an instructor at Peloton. Peloton just raised $550 million at a $4 billion valuation. They identified new technology, streaming at in-home, and they were able to scale. And they innovated on the pricing model. $39 per month, all you can eat, instead of paying $20 or $30 per class. So they greatly expanded that market, and they're winning. Now, the interesting thing here is there are a bunch of competitors chasing Peloton. Did anybody see the mirror ad during Super Bowl? So there's this mirror that's mounted on the wall that you displayed an instructor giving you guidance and some of your metrics, your heart rate and so forth on the screen. So they are chasing Peloton with a different take on it. Can you take this model? So if you start teasing apart, for every successful company, you can start teasing apart using those tools on the business side, tease apart their business, find the chink in the armor. Maybe you can build a new business. I'm going to skip this one. Bevi. I love Bevi. I don't know them. I was a customer, one of the earliest customer in New York for them. They started with a impact mission, a mission-driven company in today's lingo. The founders hate seeing all the plastic bottles and cans waste. Plastics is a huge problem. All the plastics ever made in the world are mostly still with us. And so you have lots of plastic bottles that you go grab one. So they invented a machine that is internet connected. It can dial amount of bubbles that you have in it and different flavors that were all 0 calorie, all natural. And they have a subscription model. Again, a business model innovation. When I started, it was $3.99 per month and all you can drink. They just raised $35 million. Total multiple rounds have raised $63 million based in Boston. Really, really compelling story. I'm going to skip this because of time, but I love this bridge. The designer was inspired by watching somebody work a sewing machine to come up with this way to build the bridge. All right, so this is all the ways that's the framework that I gave. These are sort of the example of ideas that came with each one of these. You can apply them to your own. So summary, there are more ideas than you think that exist. Just learn, read news, keep track. This is part of Clayton Christensen's observe and ask question. That part is true. But you can focus those by looking at existing businesses. What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? That gives you a really great framework to build a business instead of building it from scratch. When you do find your idea, be objective. Don't fall in love too quickly. You can't help it, but try to hold it off as long as you can. Be as objective as you can. Yeah. Reduce risk. You want to succeed because if you exit it once as a successful entrepreneur, things get easier the second time around, and so on and so forth, from fundraising to recruiting. So build your career with sort of this trajectory in mind instead of, I'm going to build one home run, one unicorn, and then go sit on a beach. Might be possible, but it's going to be really hard. Pivot is a personal pet peeve of mine. I had an entrepreneur once came up to me and told me, I pivoted 6 times, thinking that he was impressing me with his agile view of the world. To me, pivot is a fail. Either you gave up too early, or you didn't do the analysis, sunk a bunch of work in that is now wasted because a quick analysis would have told you it was not workable. It's an absolute emergency. This is your phone a friend, emergency lifeline. Don't go there unless you have to. Do the analysis up front, right? And if you do the analysis up front, hopefully you avoid the pivot. One last thing, I love this example. So luck favors the prepared mind. How do you prepare yourself? This is a photo of a rainbow ending on the Portola Palace in Tibet. So this is Ansel Adams. Sorry for the low quality photo in Yosemite. He's famous in saying that the way to take great photos is set up your camera, point it at something really pretty, and wait for the light. This is my mentor, Galen Rowell. He doesn't wait. He's an active bunny. He's an Energizer bunny. He has more energy than anybody I've ever met. He chases after things. So back to this story. So Galen took this photo. When Galen saw the rainbow on the plateaus up in Tibet, the rainbow didn't end on the palace. He knew the people of Tibet was struggling. He realized what a symbolism this photo would be for the Tibetan people, to have a rainbow end on the Potala Palace, which was the home to Dalai Lama until 1959 when he was forced out by the Chinese government and had to escape to India. The rainbow was nowhere near the palace. So he saw the rainbow and he said, but he has studied physics. He's not a science person, but he became a photographer. He studied the physics of light. He understood how a rainbow worked. And he said, if I keep moving that direction, the rainbow will keep shifting the perspective on it. And I know the Potala Palace is over there. So he grabbed his camera and ran. By the way, this plateau is at 11,000 feet. I would have been dead on the road long before I got there. But he got there and he was able to take this picture. The point here is you can gather the dots, as Steve said, by taking different hobbies, different classes. But at the same time, you can be active and connect the dots forward and make things happen. So, go find your rainbow and see what's at the end of it. You can connect the dots. Five minutes over. So we have 10 minutes for questions.
Hi, my name is Ingrid Cook, and I have a startup called Shazoom. Essentially, it's like Flume, but for self-insured auto, on the auto side.
Yep.
So my question is, with your pivot equals failure, so that stood out to me. And you said, for two reasons, I wanted you to expound on what your version of quick analysis was. And then would you have considered the example that you said with Airbnb, because technically, well, I don't know, do you think that was a pivot in regards to the
Yes.
having the host?
Yes.
But they were largely successful.
No, not the first 2 years.
Or because they pivoted, right?
Yes, it's because they pivoted.
Yeah.
Right. They changed their business model from requiring a host, serving breakfast, staying with the host. That was their business model. They changed to essentially renting your room or renting your house. That's the successful model. It's closer to a hotel, but you're running a hotel when you're not using your home.
Right.
Yeah.
But in your idea of a pivot, that was still a pivot.
That is a pivot.
Yeah. So when you talk about quick analysis,
Yep.
and in light of that Airbnb example,
Yep.
can you tell us, like,
So
what do you do?
I didn't mean that the pivot will result in failure. Pivot is a failure in that it costs you time, costs you money, costs you blood, sweat, and tears, right? So they went and built Airbnb in the early days with their mission in mind, try to make that work. If they did the analysis and say, what's the market size for people who want to stay in somebody's home and get to know locals? Smaller than the hotel addressable market, that TAM, total addressable market, right? And so they don't know the actual numbers is what I meant, but ballpark figure, the total addressable market for somebody who wants to stay with you and have you cook me breakfast is smaller than somebody who wants to stay in a nice place, not necessarily a hotel, that's sterile, have some character of somebody's home. That's funky, that's fun. Lower cost probably, but this is too small, too hard. That is more reasonable. And so they pivoted. It's a failure that they ran for how long ever long they did there until they could change this model. Does that make more sense?
That makes a lot more sense. So
Yeah.
that's the customer development piece of
Yeah.
what you to do on
Yep.
all those other steps
Yep.
up front.
Yep.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Other questions?
Looking at your company on JavaScript, you had a very early exit, right? Very fast.
Yes.
Do you, looking back, do you think you could have held longer to that market and explore more the value you could do with that? And sort of this balance.
Yeah, hindsight. That's a tricky thing. Yes, I scrolled by really quickly. If I held on to it, it didn't exit. If I had all the business smarts that I have now, which I didn't have, I could have possibly owned the internet. Because every vertical app from the old days where you bought enterprise software had an entire changeover to a new set of players that was web-centric. And all of them are huge from Salesforce on down. If I've taken just one of those with my technology that I had, that nobody else had, I could have disrupted any one of those verticals from Salesforce to all the other things, HR software. It would be completely different. But I didn't know that. I didn't know what I know now, right? That was 20 years ago. I was a tech co-founder for my first company. This was my first stint as a CEO. I was learning on the job, and I was just 6 months into it when the offer came. And in hindsight, I lucked out because the acquisition closed in August of 2000, and the dot-com bust came a few months later. I probably wouldn't have survived.
How do you get acquired after 6 months?
They saw a technology that they had to have. Yep. It's JavaScript. Like, instead of shipping CDs, that all runs on the browser, and it all works, right? This is why. There were a few people at AOL that saw that vision, and they say, this is the technology that nobody else has. And it's absolutely true. Most people think JavaScript apps, the first commercial JavaScript app was Gmail. 2004, April 1st, we had 35 million users using my technology by 2001 on AOL.
You know, kind of, that startups are a series of high highs and low lows, right? You got to sort of even it out over time. But can you share with the group what your lowest low was and what you learned from it?
There are so many. How do you pick? I mean, it doesn't get easier. It does. I said it does get easier. You get easier fundraising, but those lows still come. Like my fourth startup, there will still be days I wake up and it's like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? I'm sure those who have started companies, it's like, why am I doing this? Everybody else is having a beer bash, right? I'm sitting here alone and in front of my computer. The lowest low would be, it wasn't a low, it was the scariest moment in my first company. We were in acquisition talk with Sun. They wanted to do a lot of due diligence. And the cost of our lawyers and our accountants to fulfill the due diligence requirement, we would be bankrupt if the deal didn't go through. We were just pushing the bills off. Like, we didn't have that much money. And so if that deal fell apart, we would be done. Yeah, that's pretty scary.
What did you learn? How did you deal with similar situations later?
Don't push it until the very end of your string. negotiate from the strength, a place of strength. Those are the lessons. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
You mentioned that you started your first company 2 years after graduating.
Yep.
I am wondering, what were you up to in the 2 years between graduating and starting your first company?
I work for the CS department as a research developer. So I spent 2 years on third floor Wien Hall. Anything else? Yeah.
How did you go about, did you notice a difference in your ability to pick the right team from company one versus company four?
Yeah.
Or any advice you can give there?
Recruiting is hard. It's like dating. It's hard to know somebody on a couple of dates, and you have to decide, do you want to hire this person after 3 rounds of interviews, an hour each, and you get everybody in your company to interview them, and you can be methodical, but the bad ones slip through. So the only way is to be objective and give the person a chance to correct if things are not working, but to pull the plug early. So within the first 3 to 6 months, if it doesn't work. Because especially in early day startups, when they are employee number 3 or 4, that's a quarter of your team. Like if it's not working, 25% efficiency just went away. And that's best case scenario. If they were actively doing something that doesn't work, the other people have to pick up the slack and go fix the mistakes or fix the problem. So it might be 50%. Like that's how big of a drag it could become, right? So you have to pull those people out very quickly.
All right, unfortunately, we're out of time because we have Alan booked for something else right at 1:30. So let's give Alan a great big applause.
Thank you.
Alan was very generous with his time with CMU alum, so if any of you want to reach